Hello and welcome to another on-demand webinar presented by demandDrive. Thanks for everyone who's watching right now. You might notice I'm not the guy who normally moderates these things, and that's because that guy is our guest today, AJ Alonso, Director of Marketing at demandDrive. How are you doing today?
I'm good, Alex. How does it feel to be on the, visible side of one of these?
I do like producing and editing them. We'll see. I'll wait for the feedback. If anyone, watching this, if I'm doing a terrible job, please let me know. If I'm doing a great job, also let me know. If it's you don't have to say anything. It's fine. 3 stars.
Only ones or fives out of 5.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I only want very critical in either direction feedback. Yeah. Anyway, to get back on track, AJ, the reason that you're the guest today instead of the moderator is because I wanted to talk to you about sort of the main questions that you've found help companies to build out their sales development function. We obviously have a lot of conversations. We have a lot of clients, and everyone's a little bit different. But through those conversations, you've sort of been able to distill the questions you need to ask yourself to build a sales development function down to about 5 or 6 questions. So
Yep.
Before we dive into each question specifically, I'd love a quick rundown what those 6 questions are and maybe a little bit of context as to how you came to those conclusions.
Yeah. So as an organization that builds and manages sales development functions for our clients, inevitably, whenever we're hopping on sales conversations, or mostly in my case, some of that pre-sale stuff, kind of teeing up our sales team, we get asked tons and tons of questions about the intricacies of building a sales development function. And over the past 5-ish years, I would say, I've started to lump them into larger categories that I've noticed a lot of organizations kind of default to when they start to build this process out. When they want to get this function off the ground, they're asking sort of the same 6-ish questions almost every single time. If they're very early stage, they don't really have a whole lot of knowledge or bandwidth or internal processes built out. And those 6 questions, starting from, I guess, like the most crucial to maybe some of the more nuanced, would be, do I need SDRs? Where do I find SDRs? How do I train them? How do I motivate them? How much do I pay them? And then how do I help them move up and out of the SDR role? So those 6 really kind of culminate all into this idea of like, how do I build an SDR function in my mind, based on what I've seen over the past half decade or so.
Cool. Yeah. Well, I'm excited to get into it. So without adding any additional fluff, do I need SDRs?
Well, I don't know, Alex. Tell me a bit about your business. No, it's a question that, I probably 9 times out of 10 get asked by an organization that does not have SDRs because they're looking to grow and scale their organization. And they've been told by either mentors or VCs or some community that the best way to do that is sales development. And while that's true, there are some variables that kind of dictate whether or not having an SDR function in place makes sense at that time. And more often than not, organizations shouldn't have SDR functions if one of these few things don't exist. Number one being a non-defined go-to-market strategy. So a lot of SDRs work really well when they can get directed to a certain place, even if those places are experimental. I think we can work with post-Series A companies. These are the types of people we can work with, and here's why. Organizations, if they're still trying to figure out their product, the value that it brings, their ICP, if they don't have any marketing resources, they're typically too early stage for an SDR function to make sense and really generate any kind of return on that investment. More often than not, organizations in that stage tend to rely pretty heavily on founder sales. So having the founder kind of work through their network, building up relationships that way, getting those first like beta customers in the door, and then building on top of that. If you're at that stage, SDRs probably don't make sense yet.
Right. Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to sort of to add on to that. Yeah. The SDR should be there to really, it helps boost what you already have going on in sales and marketing. But if you don't know what you have going on yet, like you're still solidifying the framework on both sides, having an SDR can A, get confusing, B, maybe give them a little bit too much control, right? I don't know if you've come across that ever happening, but right? If you have a head of sales or maybe an AE, a head of marketing or a marketing person, and then also an SDR, and they're not that experienced, right? They're still just an SDR. Can they sort of pull and detract from what marketing and sales are trying to do if those processes aren't built out yet already?
A little bit, yeah. I'm a huge fan of, as you know, Alex, and as people who have listened to any of our recent podcasts or webinars, I'm a big fan of feedback loops. SDRs have a ton of conversations on a daily basis that uncover some pretty vital information about ICP development, company direction, product development, stuff like that. That anecdotal information can really make or break a lot of organizations. But like you said, that only works if you've built it on top of an existing foundation. A lot of times, if SDRs early on are trying to provide that feedback, you're like building the foundation with non-expert feedback, which can be valuable, but it does sometimes lead to a bit of a shakier, more crumbly foundation than you would like. Whereas you really want early on, you want your founders to be talking to other founders, to CROs, to CEOs, and doing less customer discovery and more expert discovery, I guess you would say, to try and shape the foundation and direction of the organization.
Gotcha. Okay. So if you're too early stage, your stuff isn't defined yet. Are there any other reasons you might not need an SDR?
Yeah, one big one is if you have a really transactional product. It's kind of wishy-washy there. I know there are a lot of organizations that do have pretty transactional, product-led growth type mentalities where SDRs do work. And those are typically very high volume organizations. Those reps are talking with hundreds of people a day, and they've got thousands upon thousands of customers to work with. But more often than not, a full cycle sales rep does just fine in that environment. If you can close somebody kind of over the phone on the initial conversation, then having an SDR doesn't necessarily make sense from an ROI standpoint. A lot of SDRs do really well in environments that have longer, more complicated sales cycles. They require a lot more research. It's something that an AE can't just kind of do in 3 or 4 steps. You need the SDR to do a lot of legwork early on to make the AE's job easier. In some of these more transactional sales, an AE can literally, I've had this happen to me in the past, humble brag, pick up the phone and in one dial get a decision maker and have them say, can I give you my credit card information right now to purchase this thing? An SDR, typically they're getting paid, and we'll talk about this later, 65K OTE a year. An AE is getting paid 150K OTE a year. They're doing the same exact job in that situation, but one's getting paid like double the other. So if you can just eliminate 65K OTE from there and just lump all of that into a closing team, you're probably a little bit better off.
Yeah, it makes total sense. So moving on to the next section there. So let's say we've established me, Alex, company Alex, needs SDRs. Long sales cycle, very complicated product I've got here. Where do I find these SDRs?
So you're in luck, company Alex, because at this point, SDRs are pretty ubiquitous, might be the best word to describe it. Like any SaaS organization worth their salt understands that having a sales development function makes sense. And it means that there is a boon of SDRs in the space that are looking for jobs, or individuals in college who are kind of making that transition into the workforce that want to get in on the ground floor and know that doing that as an SDR makes a ton of sense. So at this point, look on LinkedIn. There are plenty of people looking for SDR jobs. You can also scour through various online sales communities. SDR Nation and Vendition are 2 that come to mind that do a really good job at prepping individuals who maybe don't have a ton of SaaS experience or are just jumping into the workforce, and giving them a really solid foundation of skills, both soft and hard skills, to prepare them to be successful SDRs. So grabbing reps who have gone through those communities is a really solid way to start that off. And then there are recruiters who work specifically within sales development to find SDRs who have either maybe been in a job for 6 months to a year and are looking for a new organization to join, or like I said, individuals who are maybe coming out of professional sales programs in colleges or have expressed an interest in moving into sales. They kind of specialize in getting those reps into SDR positions. So those are 2 really great places to look. And then shameless plug, there's always the opportunity to outsource that function. Look at an organization who has done a good job and has a good track record at finding, recruiting, and then training SDRs and placing them at your organization. So you kind of eliminate all of those headaches early on, and you get someone who is theoretically good at the job without having to dump a ton of resources into their development.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So this question just came to mind. It's kind of between finding good SDRs and the next section talking about training them. Does previous experience matter, or should I ask, how much does it matter when you're hiring SDRs?
Great question. And I think it depends on the maturity of your organization. If you are a startup or scale up and you've determined that SDRs are right for you and you need customers and you need them quickly, then you probably do want to find someone with some experience, because it means that they're able to hit the ground running a little bit quicker. They can more quickly, the time to value here is huge. They can more quickly confirm your hypotheses, get some early customers in, start developing their pipeline. Whereas if you're at a more established organization and you don't necessarily need some quick wins early on, you might want to take someone who is unproven or unpolished and put them through a training and development program to get them from, I don't know anything about sales development, to an A player, as you say. Personally, my philosophical belief is that anybody can be a good SDR. It depends on how much enablement, support, training, and development that you give them. And theoretically, if you funnel a ton of resources into that side of the business, you can take anybody at all, anyone off the street, as they say, and turn them into a good SDR. It means you're going to have a incredibly long, sustainable pipeline of reps that can continue to build and drive revenue for you, rather than sinking more resources into finding former SDRs or trained SDRs. That's going to take more time, more energy, more effort from your recruiting team. So depends on kind of where your organization is, where it sits, and what you want to do in terms of investing the time and resources into recruiting.
Right. Yeah, that makes total sense. And if you're hiring someone that has no experience, but they're in one of these communities, is that just like they have a little experience? Like, how would you weigh that?
Yeah, it's like a soft skills versus hard skills thing, right? Like if someone's taken the time and effort to join an online sales community and kind of go through some of the basic functions around like, what is an SDR? What do I do on a day-to-day basis? They understand the very basics, the foundation of it. That's someone who's probably accountable, somebody who has a growth mindset. They're curious. Like those are the things that you look for in terms of someone who's maybe not proven as an SDR, but has the basic building blocks that you can then mold into a great SDR.
Right. Yeah. Love it. So diving a little bit more into the training side of things here, you sort of mentioned you want to have a robust, fully developed training program. What does that look like, particularly at an organization that maybe only has a handful of SDRs, where, is it worth the investment if you're only training a few people? What sort of is the mindset that you have to have there?
Yeah. There's this mentality that a lot of organizations who build up SDR functions take, where they have this like one and done training style, where maybe for 1 or 2 weeks, you take somebody, pull them into the organization, give them the old SDR 101, and then just like push them into the deep end of the pool and say, hey, good luck, buddy. Like, hope this works out for you. There was actually a webinar back in 2020 that Aaron Ross and Colin Cadmus produced about a lot of the systemic problems within sales development. And one of the big points that they made was about the speed of which a lot of organizations kind of take their training process. The exact quote is something along the lines of like, taking a kid out of college and expecting them to generate revenue after a couple of weeks of training is absurd. And yet that's what a lot of organizations default to. And so what we've done at demandDrive, and what we've seen a lot of other organizations do, is take this more long-term approach to training and development, so that it's not just a single 2-week, you get the SDR 101 and then you're off to the races. It's closer to like a 90-day full cycle training and development program, in which you have set checkpoints at specific like 30, 60, and 90-day marks to make sure that reps aren't just learning the material that they need to learn to succeed as SDRs, but they're also retaining it. Because that's the big thing that's missing with a lot of training, is the retention side of things. Instead of the sink or swim mentality, you want to be able to push a rep into the pool and then make sure that you have like little water wings or like floaties available for them that allow them to retain, the analogy is kind of losing here, but it allows them to retain some of the information that maybe they learned in week 2 that they're now putting into practice. You can't just learn something and immediately do it, right? Like human brains don't work that way unless you're superhuman. But there's a necessity for ongoing training and development and reinforcement of some of these key characteristics of what makes a successful SDR that organizations aren't touching on, that we've done and we've seen other organizations do at that like 30, 60, 90-day mark, to the point where you can kind of feel comfortable, like, this SDR is producing replicable results that I can see continuing in the future, rather than maybe a flash in the pan at 30 days and then a dip because they're not practicing what they've learned in training.
Right. Yeah, exactly. When you were talking about retention of things you learned, it took me back to high school English class when we'd always have the weekly, like the vocab words of the week for SAT prep or whatever. And you'd spend all week just like trying to memorize these words.
Yep.
And then you never see 95% of those words again, or at least not in the next 6 months. So you forget all of them, right? Or at least ones you don't come across again. But that's the key right there, right? The ones that I learned that then like, oh, I noticed in this book I was reading, or like in this other class that I had work to do for, those are the ones you remember. So as boring and mundane as it may feel, like repetition is a huge part of it. And you can't have that in a 1 week intensive boot camp of training.
Right. The framework that I guess it's a framework. The thing that I look at when it comes to how SDRs kind of best learn how to be good reps is something I call the ELO method: experience, learn, optimize. So for a lot of SDRs, like they do get pushed kind of right into the deep end of the pool or into the fire, whatever the analogy you want is. And it's like drinking through a fire hose, just like a bunch of stuff that they learned in training happens to them in a few weeks. And if they're not actively learning from that experience, meaning they go through retention sessions and development sessions with the team internally to understand, I handled an objection this way. Could I have done it any better? Or what I learned in training is fully lost on me as soon as I hit the real world here. How can I best take what I learned and actually implement it? That experience does nothing for you. If you're not learning from it, then you've just experienced it and that's it. But the key there is the optimization. So understanding what you've experienced and learning from it allows you to tweak and modify that to get better at it in the future. And that's where the best SDRs shine, is that optimization aspect of being able to think critically about the situations that they've experienced, and really understand how to move past that and learn from it and then make it better the next time. The best managers are the ones who really focus on that with their team.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And that, because everyone talks about, you've got your C-level, B-level, A-level players in the SDR space. And you can really sort of see those levels play out with how far along, I would say, this ELO method they get, right? If they just experience it, they don't really know what they're doing still, like C-level. They learn from it, that could be a B-level, but they're not really doing anything to improve upon it. And then you have the A players who are like, oh, this was cool. What if I do this? What if I did that? And they take the time, they experiment beyond that, and then optimize. I like that framework for looking at it.
That's a really good way to put it. Yeah.
Yeah. So moving to the next section, you've got your SDRs. I've got my SDRs. I've got them trained.
Company Alex.
And now, what is my best practice? What can I do to make sure that these SDRs are motivated and then they stay motivated throughout their time, throughout all the rejection they're going to hit, and all of that?
Yeah. So I'll flip that on its head a little bit and say that the best way to demotivate one of your SDRs is to set unattainable goals. It means that your forecasting and the capacity planning that you've done is wrong in some capacity. The equation there for setting the goal, whether it's meetings booked, revenue generated, whatever your success metric looks like, the equation to get to that is broken in some capacity and too difficult for your SDRs to reach. And that is the easiest way to demotivate anyone on your team. If they aren't winning in a way that you want them to win, and you let them know it, then you're going to start having reps feel burnt out. You're going to have reps start looking for new jobs, and you're going to start to sink more money into resources, into bringing new members onto your team. So that's the opposite of what you want. Motivation starts by setting proper goals. So having a proper goal in place that is kind of that perfect fit in between attainable, but not too ridiculous for a rep to hit. That goes back to forecasting and capacity planning, which is a whole separate event that we did in a previous webinar with our CEO that you should check out. But that's like number one, is setting proper goals. Number two is understanding that not everyone is motivated the same way. There are, roughly speaking, 3 different types of motivation buckets that people fall into: altruistic motivation, extrinsic motivation, and intrinsic motivation. Altruistic motivation is when an individual feels motivated. They get that serotonin boost from just helping other people. It's a very small portion of top performers are altruistically motivated, but you'll see them when they offer to volunteer to run workshops for new employees or start to take on more responsibility around like building reports. The reps who want to just like help other people, about like, I don't know, 2 to 5% of reps kind of fall in that category. Extrinsic motivated reps are the ones that you typically associate with high performers in sales. They're the ones who are focused on external rewards, typically money. So if they go above and beyond to hit their lead goal and their accelerators, they want to be compensated for it with extra cash. Contrary to popular belief, only 12 to 15% of top performers kind of fall in this category, and a hefty majority, so like 80+%, fall into the intrinsic category. And those are reps who are motivated by self-competition and recognition. So they're motivated to see their name at the top of the leaderboard. They're motivated to get a shout out from the CEO of the company. They want people to know that they're the best, and they do what they do simply to be the best. They're probably not going to say no to some extra cash, but they do it because they want that feeling of accomplishment from sort of like a public recognition. And knowing which kind of bucket your reps fall into will help you properly motivate them. And you're probably going to have a mix depending on how many people are on your team. So knowing that if Alex, your company has 4 SDRs and 2 of them are really intrinsically motivated and 2 of them are extrinsically motivated, if you dangle a cash prize for a contest in front of your entire team and only 2 people bite, it's probably because they're the extrinsically motivated people. So you can't expect to motivate someone intrinsically if they're an extrinsic individual, and vice versa. That's like the other big thing you have to think about, is figuring out kind of which category your reps sit in and structuring how you motivate them based on that.
Yeah. And I think it's just such an important part of the job and part of the manager's job, because you deal with all that rejection on a day-to-day basis, and being able to even turn, a bad conversation that turned bad into like, here's the positives of it. You did still win in this capacity, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is a huge portion of that. Pushing towards, you mentioned, a little extra money there. So I think this would be a great time to ask you, how much should I be paying these SDRs? I know there's a lot of different numbers out there. Different companies have their different methods for coming up with it. What do you see, and sort of what are also your beliefs in that area?
My belief is that the SDR is a whole lot more important than you give them credit for, and you should probably pay them more. But in reality, there are actually a lot of resources out there. I'll shout out RepVue specifically, REPVUE, RepVue. They've gathered an absolute insane amount of data on average pay and compensation for SDRs across the country. So thinking about like a national average, I believe, I'll actually pull the link up right now so I don't misspeak in any capacity. According to RepVue, nationally average-wise, the base salary for an SDR is just under $54,000, and their OTE, their on-target earnings, which is the base plus their commission, is just under $83,000. On the highest end, some reps make $147,000. On the lowest end, some make $30,000. And this is obviously based on like regionally, where are you located? It's based on what type of solution you sell. So an enterprise level sales development rep is probably going to garner a higher salary than someone who's in that SMB market selling something that's like $10,000 versus $1 million. There's a bunch of different variables that you have to consider when figuring out what to actually pay your SDRs. So I'll link the resources for RepView so that you can all take a look, the listeners here. But the big thing to consider when it comes to payment is that it's an indicator of the type of rep that you're attracting to your organization. If you have an incredibly high OTE, the pool that you're dipping into is huge. Like reps want to see a high OTE when they're applying, but it means that you're probably going to be attracting individuals that, I don't know, are like maybe not the best fit for your organization. If your OTE is insanely high and then you find reps who are coming from other enterprise level organizations and you're an SMB and they come into your not rinky dink, Alex, you run a tight ship over there. But they come into your organization and it's culturally very different, maybe not fully what they expect or what they experienced previously. That's a rift that you have to close in some capacity. And then similarly, if you have an incredibly low OTE, just because you don't want to pay your reps a ton, the pool that you're dipping into has shrinked considerably. And maybe you're grabbing individuals who are just trying to get their feet wet within sales development. And they're just trying to get a job so they can get another job. And that then brings in the idea of inevitable churn with your organization. So there's a lot to consider when you're trying to figure out how much to pay your reps. But bottom line, look at the national averages, look at sites like RepView, and then I think Aspireship and Glassdoor probably have some data as well. You can figure out pretty easily like what the best compensation method is.
Yeah. I've used Glassdoor for some research. They have good like regional numbers. I don't know where the data's from. I think it's all self-reported at this point, but
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
So, take it with a grain of salt, but it's at least better than throwing a dart at a board.
You don't know that. The dart could be perfect and bullseye. Pay him just the right amount. So without diving too much into the churn and the turnover, which is sort of a known problem, very quick tenure of SDRs, I want to look at one of the ways people can avoid that, and it's helping SDRs move up and out of the role. So I'd love to get your take on not only good strategies for how to do that, but also, why exactly is that important beyond what I just mentioned?
Yeah. So, I mean, very quickly, your point on churn, it's inevitable. The SDR shelf life at this point, I think, is somewhere between 14 and 18 months. So knowing that you have 14 to 18 months to get as much production out of an individual as possible means that the time that you spend with them during those 14 months is crucial. Like you want them to be as productive as possible while they're still with your organization. One of the best ways to do that is know that career development and ultimate sort of like graduation out of the SDR role is something that should be celebrated and is a two-way street. Celebrated in the fact that if you can take someone who maybe has no experience or this is their first SDR job and they're, I'm just trying to get my feet wet within SaaS. If you can take someone like that and in 14 months turn them into somebody who can be promoted into an AE or get promoted into a senior SDR at a different organization, that's a huge win for you because it means that your training and development program is good enough where you can take a 0 and turn them into an A player. So first of all, think about that mentality because that's something that will help you shape how you look at the SDR function in terms of someone who comes in and graduates out of the role. But number two, what it does is it helps you create a really powerful talent pipeline. So if you can start doing this for organization or for individuals within your organization, and you publicly celebrate the fact that you took someone from nothing to a promoted AE, then you start to get the word out on your organization's overall talent structure. You bring in more individuals that maybe wouldn't have found you beforehand. And that talent pipeline starts to grow to the point like what we talked about earlier. You've developed a long-term, more sustainable pool of SDRs to take into your organization, build up, allow them to grow, and then boot them out the door so that they can go succeed somewhere else. I think that's like a huge mental gap that a lot of organizations don't have. They focus on retention rather than development. And retention is great, but it's also a lot more costly. And at the end of the day, your rep's going to leave anyways. They're going to leave after 18 months. Churn is inevitable within this role. So you want to celebrate the wins because it gives you that longer term talent pipeline. And you start to build an organization that focuses more on long-term sustainable pipeline development.
Yeah.
I had another point to make and I've totally lost it. So I'll let you ask a question.
Well, I was actually going to follow up. You think about that while I add in. It's also important to remember that not every SDR wants to become an AE, right? That's not the only path. You could be an SDR manager. Parts of the business that have a lot of similar skills involved are recruiting, customer success, marketing, right? And even beyond that, I think the SDR role does a good job of just introducing someone to how businesses kind of work, right? Where the revenue comes from and then where it ends up. So if you have an SDR who's like, okay, so I'll sign that deal, now it goes into that, like if they're interested in the finances of it, expose them to that. Get them to set up a one-on-one with the CFO or someone on their team. In addition to them, like, right, piquing their interest, staying with the company longer, it also helps them be a better SDR, in my opinion. I think that if the more you know about not just your product and what you're selling, but how the company works, you're more bought into the company as a whole, and it gives you insight that is unique to you. So when you're an SDR and you really are trying to stand out through all the noise, not only amongst your fellow SDRs, right, to become the best A player there is, but also when you're reaching out to prospects, having little unique either intricacies or facts or details about your company and how it helps or what you're trying to sell are only going to help. So having as much of that, as much exposure to parts of the company you're interested in, if you are an SDR, I think goes a lot further than people really think about.
Yeah. And you reminded me what I was going to say. So thank you. The fact that it is a two-way street. So like you have reps who want to move up and out of the role, right? Like nobody wants to be an SDR forever. If you, like you were talking about, kind of meet them halfway and go, listen, I know you don't want to be an SDR in 18 months. You want to be an AE. I'm going to do everything I can to help get you to that point, but you have to do everything you can while you're in this role to prove to me that investing in you makes sense, right? So having that mentality, having that back and forth between a rep, putting their all in and then you investing fully in them will work wonders for the two of you, because you have an SDR who's fully bought in for 14 to 18 months driving pipeline for your organization, and they have somebody who's looking out for them for the next step in their career. If you can systematize that in a way where you bring reps in, invest in them, and they leave, and then their seat gets filled with another rep who wants that same experience, you've created an unbelievably valuable talent pipeline that allows you to grow the organization as you grow the individual.
Yep. I love it. All right. Looks like we're running out of time here. So AJ, before I finally wrap up, are there any final points, anything you want to say to leave the audience with here at the end?
That's a great question. No, I know I brought up a ton of resources during this short session, so I'll make sure to provide links to all of the things that we're talking about, some supplementary content to help illustrate some of the points that I've made. I guess the big takeaway that I would give someone who's listening to this is that building an SDR function is a whole lot more than just hiring someone to sit down and make phone calls and send emails. There is a lot of nuance to the job that exists now that didn't exist 3 or 5 or 10 years ago. And the more that you can tap into that nuance and the more that you can invest in the function as a strategic department rather than just a pure activity kind of brute force department, the better your organization will be. There's a lot that SDRs can do for you that isn't just filling activities, putting in activities and filling your pipeline. So I would encourage anybody to, and I know you're going to ask, how can they learn more about you, AJ? So I'm going to jump in and do it for you. If you do want to continue this conversation, learn more about sort of our philosophy on the value of sales development reps, what they can bring to an organization beyond pipeline generation and activity, please reach out to me. My email is aj.alonso@demandDrive.com. I'm all over LinkedIn, AJ Alonso. Pretty sure I'm the only one on there. So feel free to connect with me, shoot me a message. Love talking about this stuff, so I'm happy to chat with anyone.
Love it. Pro tip, especially if you're an SDR reaching out to AJ, capitalize both letters of his first name.
Otherwise I'll just send you right to spam.
Exactly. Awesome. Well, AJ, thank you so much for joining. For everyone that just watched all this, I hope you got something great out of it, at least one thing, hopefully more. But if you do have any questions for myself, AJ, demandDrive as a whole, he just listed everywhere to find us. And until next time, thank you.
Thank you.